Thanks for joining us for this next session of the summit. We welcome everybody, and this particular session has been developed, I guess, in response. It's a bit of a provocative title. We've deliberately chosen a provocative title for this particular session, which is called "Why We Need to Radically Change the Way That We Campaign." So today's discussion responds to the strong solution theme of the summit that we're all taking part in this weekend, and it has been developed to address the need to review our current approaches to climate action. My name is Luke Taylor, and I'm the Director of the Sustainable Living Foundation, and I'm also the convener of the Breakthrough Summit that was just recently held in Melbourne. Our panel today is made up of Philip Sutton, who may be no surprise to many of you here. I'll do a formal introduction in a moment. And Adrian Whitehead, who is also a community campaigner and activist who's been involved in climate change for quite some time. The format of today is going to take the shape of a in-conversation and discussion with both Philip and Adrian around this topic. And then we'll be taking some questions straight after the session as well. So I think we've got about 15, we're allowing about 15 or 20 minutes for discussion, so hold on to your questions. So to start off, we welcome Philip Sutton. We're going to put Philip in the hot seat to start off with. Philip is currently the manager and the strategic analyst for Rusty. We'll hear a little bit more about Rusty in a moment from Philip. Philip's background, of course, has been a long-time activist and strategist within the climate action movement. And Philip is also the co-author of Climate Code Red. So please welcome Philip Sutton. Please use that microphone so we can all hear you.
Very good. Is that going up?
So Philip, just to start off with, it's been nearly 7 years now since you co-wrote Climate Code Red. What's changed in that time? What is the scientific context that we need to realise now as we embark on this new path of climate activism?
Okay, well, I'll just pick out three sort of startling things. I mean, there's a huge amount of science that's come out since then. The basic arguments in terms of the urgency and the requirement for really major action to cool the climate has been corroborated by the science since. But the new things that really stand out are the news about the West Antarctic ice sheet, which people will probably know about, where basically it's begun a melt which, unless we actually cool the Earth back lower than the current temperature, then that will remain unstoppable until we cool the planet. So that's one thing. Secondly, 2 degrees of warming is most likely to melt the whole of Greenland. So that's another 7 metres of sea rise over the long haul. And also the other thing is a 1.5 degree warming is likely to cause the release of more than half of the 3,000 billion tonnes of carbon in the Arctic area, in the permafrost in the Arctic Ocean. And that represents somewhere, depending on how much of that 3,000 billion actually does get released, that represents somewhere between 3 and 6 times the amount of emissions that humans have already caused. So that wouldn't happen necessarily in a huge rush, I think, is the current feelings, but it would build up over a period of hundreds of years. But even so, the quantities are so huge that it would make a massive difference. So I guess what it means is that the notion that we need to, with these kind of figures, zero emissions is looking like the go, and we need to cool the planet. So that message from Climate Code Red has been really clear. So
Philip, as about as long as I have known you, you've been advocating for an emergency response. Obviously the work that you've done in assessing the science has led you to the conclusion that the only way forward is, in a sense, a war footing type style full emergency response. can you give us an idea of when you talk about that, what is it that you actually mean, and give it some shape? What are we talking about here? What might it look like?
Okay. The need for that level of action. If you can go to zero emissions really fast, and you're going, well, if we want to cool the planet, we can't afford to have large amounts of additional emissions, because we're going to have to take them back out of the air again to have a naturally safe climate. So the workload is enormous. We are currently, in a sense, chipping away at the edges of the problem. The reason why these half measures have been the norm is because people think, well, we couldn't use more than a couple of percent of GDP, of our wealth diverted from normal activities, and so everything's kind of framed with the notion that we'll live our normal life, and then we'll just devote, some sort of marginal small percentage to this effort to create a safe climate. I think that given that if you look at the figures that Kevin Anderson from the Annual Centre has come up with Alex Bowes, they're looking at 6 to 10% reductions in emissions per annum as being a necessary thing over the next 10 years, essentially globally. And that's not going to happen unless you spend a vast amount of money and get on with the job. And when you look around for the only situations where we've done things on that kind of speed and scale, then you're looking at World War II as a bit of an analogy. Now, fortunately, our job is to save lives rather than kill them. So we've got a different job than World War II, but the investment of time, energy, and the ability to go outside of life as normal is crucial. When people think that they're just simply acting within normal mode, they look for easy actions, sort of long-term, incremental, drawn out. They get really upset if they have to make any sort of notable changes in their lifestyle or what their work is or whatever. Once you're in emergency mode, it's a completely different thing. I mean, if you had a flood or a fire or whatever, all the appointments you had booked up in for months ahead, you couldn't care a damn about. You get on with the job of saving your life or saving a friend's life or whoever you happen to see. So it's a completely different framework. Now that's why it's essential, I think, to first of all be able to mobilise a sufficient amount of money, time and effort and economic resources to make the changes. But secondly, to get ourselves out of this mode where everybody's protesting about not wanting to kind of upset their current lifestyle.
So let's go back a little bit in terms of what you were saying with a bit of the game changer at the moment with the science and obviously what's happening in West Antarctica, sheep and so forth. I think Carol Rides actually passed around a postcard. Carol, has it gone out yet? Most people have got that. That's the kind of context that you would see that we're operating at the moment. In fact, you've got the slide. So in terms of going back to a starting point, what are these goals that we should be going for?
Well,
that's the context that we're in at the moment.
Yeah. The thing is that what people have, there's a report being put out by Worldwide Fund for Nature in 2009 which said that if you did the fastest possible normal economic reform to get all the industry sectors going for zero emissions and so on, that you would have to have started the program at full scale and be keeping it going from now until 2050 if you wanted to achieve not 100% certainty of keeping the warming under 2 degrees, or at 2 degrees. So, and then by the way, the year they said that you'd have to get started is this year. So since the world is not operating at that scale, then what we know is that normal economic reform can't do it. Let's repeat, normal economic reform that we're all working on cannot deliver even the 2 degrees warming, which will probably melt Greenland and will certainly keep West Antarctic melting. So what we have to do is, what I think we should be doing in terms of goals is to decide which type of future we want. At the moment, what we're offering people is the choice. Imagine you're a 20-year-old and your choice is this. Go back. Oh, sorry. We'll get to my phone. Sorry. Now, if you imagine that you're a 20-year-old and you were born in, let's say, if I got my maths right, 1994. Will Stephen said that when it's 2030, the warming up to that point under the current trajectories for what people want to do with climate will have the temperature locked in. And then by about 2070, then the temperatures will finally be capped, but the implications of those temperatures will go on causing massive rises, metres and metres and metres of sea level rise and damage to crops, etc. Basically for hundreds of years into the future. Now, that future that we're offering people, and that is the optimistic 2 degrees stabilisation and getting there by 2050. Now, that is offering a future for 20-year-olds in which things get worse and worse and worse for the whole of their life. Compared with that they just die really quickly. Now, of course, you'd rather not have the last option, but the first option is not very moving. It's not very motivating. The only way we're going to have a future that can actually deliver a decent climate in the nearer term, so it's actually within the life of people alive now, is we've got to actually cool the planet. And so this means that everything we're doing has to be different.
So this is this notion of restoration, climate restoration, as opposed to adaptation strategies.
Yep.
And mitigation strategies.
Yes, I'll show you what it looks like with that graph. Okay, so that's the current where we're heading if we don't act at all. So we don't want to do that. So what's being proposed by the official structures, the 2 degree sort of brigade, is something like that. You see at the top there where the heating is being curled over, but it's still way too high. And it stabilises and stays way too high and therefore has these ongoing effects on the environment and food production and military security and just general life and extreme weather events and so on. But what we could do is we could decide to actually restore the climate, which is that you bring down the temperature. And we could either do it, sort of from a high peak, or we could try to shave that peak off. Now, those last 2 curves are essentially what I think we should be trying to aim for, because it's the only future that's actually worth having.
So, in terms of taking on a restoration approach, climate restoration approach, means zero emissions,
Yep.
drawdown.
Yep. On a huge scale, like we have to basically reverse coal mine, gas extract, and oil extract. We have to effectively reverse our previous 100 years worth of activities in that area. So it's a very big scale operation.
Okay, so at this point you kind of say, well, that's great, Philip. I mean, who wouldn't want to get back to the same climate position? I mean, I don't think there would be obviously anyone in this room.
No, but let me test that. Does anybody actually not want to have if you have a choice between, say that, well, we don't have that. That's the current official thing that we're going for, 2 degrees. Does anybody want that one versus, say, one of those 2? Be brave. Okay. But the thing is, well, what was the question?
Well, I guess the question is, but while people may want that, I think what's obviously potentially going through people's heads is it possible to actually do this?
Yes.
And that's what we're all currently struggling with at the moment. And it's all very well for you to come and say, okay, well, we want to go for this state climate goal because that is, that's the ideal position that we would like to be in. But in terms of at the moment, we're struggling with what's politically possible to achieve, which is not even really at the 2 degree end.
Yeah.
It's more at the 3 or the 4 degree end, or possibly even more. So how do you see that you actually create a campaign that would get you to a safe climate position as opposed to a 2 degree or above position?
Okay, well, there's obviously it's probably going to have there's several parts to it. So the first thing is, how could you deliver it if you got organised? So that's where the wartime mobilisation question comes in. And the next thing is that you can't get society to commit to that. You can't have the community committing to it. You can't have governments or business committing to it unless there's actually a demand for it. I mean, just it stands to reason. Like it's a big ask, and it's not going to happen unless there's a really strong demand for it. And you can't get the demand for it unless you ask for it. You can't get the demand unless you campaign for it. So the absolute first fundamental change is that Whereas before we've had a model of campaigning to get our results through single issue campaigns. Like we every time we want to do something significant, we build a campaign, and the idea is that once we get political success, then the actions will be taken and we get our success delivered. What this would require is a different approach, which is you say, I'll step back a bit. How many people have seen the BZE reports, Beyond Zero Emissions reports? Okay, lots of people. Okay, you know that there are a number of additional reports that are due to come out, and so shortly we'll end up with an encyclopedia. And this is not a facetious comment. They are listing the things that we need to do. Now, if you go through those documents and say how many campaigns are there per page, like how many big important things need to be done, and if we try to get them by just simply creating a campaign, try to get the incremental change up, the individual regulatory change, or improve standards, or close down this, or open up that, or whatever, there's probably literally hundreds of campaigns in there. And we know from experience that the community can't get behind in a mass way, can't get behind us more than a certain number of campaigns simultaneously. Like, there's just not enough energy around, and you don't get the network effects and so on. So what I think this means is we're going to have to actually start the campaign for the lot. I don't mean having 300 campaigns. I mean we have one key campaign. We'll never have just one campaign, by the way, because if you campaign for the lot, i.e. the package, the restructuring of the economy, for a lot of people that seems a big ask, it seems very distant, seems almost a bit abstract. And so for a lot of people, they won't relate to that. So we'll have to have single issue campaigns that are concrete, immediate, got some chance of success, etc., 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 or that highly represent what we're on about, even if we fail in the short term. But we're going to have to actually arrange these single issue campaigns around the central core, which is it is time to change the whole economy, and we need to do it right now. And then there are various corollaries that come out of that, which I'm sure we can go into.
So you kind of creating a bit of a picture of a mass alliance of groups who, in a sense, have taken on parts of the whole package.
That's sort of what we've got at the moment. We've got a mass alliance where we individually we campaign for a range of different things, 100% solar energy, particular solar energy developments, or the RECs, or the divestment, or whatever. So
but they hold together, but under your model, you're saying that they would hold together a central full package campaign, so that when they're actually actively going out there and campaigning, they're campaigning for the whole bundle.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I look at it is, it's almost like every person or every campaign has two campaigns. So no matter what the specifics are that you're working on, you also campaign for getting the whole economic change as a package. Now, South Africa is a really interesting case to compare that to, because, sorry, can you hear me? South Africa is an interesting comparison, because there you had, in a sense, a whole series of campaigns around individual grievances and problems and reactions that the black community had because they didn't have the right to be treated as a citizen. And they could have just simply campaigned only as single issue campaigns, but in fact they also had, alongside that, there was the idea that let's get rid of apartheid, let's make South Africa a place where every citizen, it's managed, run, governed by the people who live in the country. So in the end, the campaign became to end apartheid. It wasn't 300 campaigns that might have eventually produced results in 300 years' time. At one point, there was an offer made by the nationalist government to have a tripartite, or tricameral parliament, so that you have whites, coloureds and blacks with their separate sections of parliament. Now, if they were using an incremental approach of, well, first we'll get this and then we can move on to something else, they would have said, yes, let's go for it. But they said, no, we actually want to have the basic fundamental thing, which is every citizen is equal, and that they all are in the pool together. And so that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. They had plenty of individual campaigns. They had boycotts in Elizabeth, and they had goodness knows how many of these local campaigns. But it was always at the back of everybody's mind, even if they didn't quite believe they could ever deliver it. Like most of the activists in South Africa wanted to end apartheid, but never believed it could happen. But they still campaigned, and then they were partly lucky and partly did a huge amount of work, and they got there.
I think my understanding with the South African campaign is also that there was a lot of hard work that was done to get the unity within the movement to a particular position at any given point in time. That's something that's quite interesting in the climate movement, because I know I've heard you speak about before, is that you get frustrated at times about the reluctance to have the conversations, to have the harder conversations about how we can get on the same page at times with targets and goals.
Yeah.
How do we tackle that unity question within the climate movement?
Okay. It's a bit of a cliche, but if we're united around goals that will deliver a future we don't want, then that unity is not very productive. Does that make sense? In other words, it's really important what we're united around. So we have to be prepared to go through a period where we actually are prepared to discuss and argue and what have you through issues to get to something where the goals are actually worth having. Now, the other part of it though is that if you want to go onto a wartime footing at speed and scale of change, the only reason why that wartime approach works, I'm not using it in a militaristic sense, I just simply mean a sort of huge scale of change. The only reason why that can work is because people, by and large, realised that they were all in it together and that they were facing, the threat to their lives. They were highly motivated by fear, but they were also, like the propagandists in wartime, were also selling the idea, we're doing this for a positive, good reason, freedom, da-da-da-da. So they had the positive and the negative motivations. But the critical thing was that there was this high level of unity. So paradoxically, I think that we need to be prepared to tolerate disunity to start with while we work out what goals that are worth having and strategies that might be actually effective. And then we have to know that in the process of doing that, we have to get to a point of high level of unity. And that's not just amongst the activists. That's across, India is a really interesting case. I don't know whether you sort of picked up that they were working really, really hard to get the Conservatives on side. And I think that the only way we can get to the kind of future we need is we have to do the same thing. We have to actually break the monopoly of the climate denialists on the right, break their monopoly on claiming to represent the right wing.
So this is this idea of what you've been calling the super majority.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit
well,
more.
The super majority, if you've got a wafer-thin majority, if you think you can crunch something through with 51% of the vote, it means that 49% of the people are out there hating what you're doing. And 49% of people are highly motivated, particularly if they think they've had something crunched through on them that they nearly could have avoided, they become pretty stroppy. And so what we'll have is more like America, where it's a kind of a logjam between the different positions. If on the other hand we sort of say, okay, look, the problem with people on the left is that they think that right-wingers can't get this stuff. And so therefore they don't even bother to go out and reach out to them. Try this little experiment. If all the left-wingers all went to Mars for a sabbatical for a couple of years, and the only people left on the planet were the right-wingers, what would happen is the fossil fuel industry would have a field day to start with, because all the controls would be taken off and they'd just be able to do anything they like. Now, can anybody predict what would happen to the climate? It would just get extremely much worse. Like, in other words, the climate problem didn't go to Mars with the lefties. The climate problem stayed on Earth with the cause of the problem. Now, the thing is, the right-wingers initially won't know what the cause is, because they'll have talked themselves into believing that it's not caused by humans. But what will happen is that the right-wing insurance agencies will find that they're losing premiums hand over fist and they're going broke. They can get their right-wing actuaries to sort it out. They will then say, well, something systematic seems to be going wrong, so they'll get their right-wing scientists to have a look at it, they'll discover climate change, and then they will talk to their right-wing military and they will think that it's not a good deal, and eventually, then within a relatively short period of time, there'll be a split in the right wing between those who are realists and realise that they've got a problem and they don't want to die, and those people who are ideological and want to beat the left, but the left aren't there anymore, so what's the point? So in other words, they will go through a major shake-up. The message out of that thought experiment is that the issue has nothing to do with left and right politics. The reason why it is at the moment is because the right wing see the left wing proposing action on climate change. They hate the left wing, therefore climate change is a very good thing. It's an issue that you can pick up and run with. But it's driven not by the issue so much. The fossil fuel industry drive it because they have a vested interest. The rest of the right wing do it because they're just going along with the normal phenomenon. They're egged on by the fossil fuel industry and they hate the left, and so they unite around us. Ultimately, it's a very good position for the right, but only if you are able to crack through and people on the right start to organise themselves around climate change. Now, we may not be sort of the best candidates here for being champions of right-wing organisation, but we probably have friends and family and mates and people we don't stand, or somebody who lives down the road who in fact is on the right, and we should be out there talking to them and helping them to get engaged, because it's going to be peer-to-peer engagement across the community, and that includes on the right, that will change this. And that's why I'm actually hopeful we actually can get the level of commitment. The other thing that really stands out is that the standard practice of activists is that when they talk to their own kind, they ramp up the goals and they ramp up their demands, and they get more Bolshevism than each other. But when they go to talk to, unless they're doing a demo outside of BHP House or something, if they're actually talking behind the scenes to right-wingers or people up in the hierarchies, they water down everything as far as they can go, because they make an assumption that these people can't take the real story. Now, a critical part of the change in the politics of this thing is we're going to have to get used to talking to people up the hierarchy and on the right and not watering down what we're saying at all. Right? Like, the goals mustn't be watered down. The strategies have got to be effective. We can debate about whether these goals are best achieved doing it different ways, but in the end we've got to be able to do it without watering down the objectives.
One of the other things you mentioned, Philip, that we need to get used to, and it's a challenging area, because you said that we need this emergency response, and emergency response for a lot of people is challenging in the sense of, well, what does that mean? Does government take over, and what are the justice issues that are relevant to an emergency response? And I guess the question is, can we accept that it is a possibility to justly carry out a climate emergency response with high level of government and industry involvement?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really key question. The history of the Second World War is that in the United States, the New Deal kind of lost its ground, and the military-industrial complex actually sort of emerged as a major force, having been on the back foot for quite some time. So the issue you raised is really important, and so on. I think that there are ways that we can approach this thing in order to ensure, or at least give us a bloody good chance of actually getting the kind of emergency response that we want. And I think the first thing to do is to actually grow it from the grassroots up. So if suburbs committed, people in a suburb committed to an emergency response and said, what can we do? How can we act in emergency mode? How can we articulate? So how can we advocate this to other parts of the community and up the, to the local government and state and federal government? And then those people, then they start to coalesce together and put campaigns to local councils to do the same thing, and then they coalesce together and put the campaign to the state governments and whatever. The thing is, what you do then is you grow the type of emergency that you want. Like you frame it, you identify the content and the mode of action. Another critical part of it is that we can either treat people as a whole pack of dummies, or we can actually say that people behave stupidly, usually because they haven't thought about the issue much, or they've been in context of conflict where they can't think about it terribly clearly. If we can, sorry, I lost my thread. Keep going.
No worries. Well, we're probably going to leave it there, because I'm glad you finished, because we're running out of time. I'm going to swing over now to Adrian Whitehead. Adrian's CV reads pretty long, so I won't read it all out, but Adrian's been campaigning on environmental issues since 1989, and he's worked very heavily in the past in the East Gippsland and Central Highlands forestry campaign. He's also been the co-founder of Beyond Zero Emissions, so it's pretty relevant that we have him on the stage, particularly in relation to this issue and this topic that we're talking about. But more recently, Adrian, you've actually taken a step out of madness or something of starting your own political party or starting a political party, Save the Planet Party. Now, it's a political party, of my understanding, that is responding to this call for an emergency response. Can you just tell me, before we get to some of the details, what on earth drove you to take on the challenge? Out of all the things that you could choose to do in the climate movement, what chose you to start a party of this nature? Why is it needed?
I think it's mainly because politicians are such nice people. So when we started Beyond Zero Emissions, there was a meeting, and I resigned my job as an activist with the Cons Council in Canberra because I was asked to campaign for 60% reductions by 2050 on 1990 levels. And I said to my boss at the time, I said, that's a death sentence for the planet, and there's no way I'll ever utter those words out of my mouth. And that was the position of the whole environment movement at the time. So I came back to Melbourne, we had a meeting, Philip was there, a few other key people there, Matthew White was there, and we did an analysis of what was needed. And Philip had Rusty, or the earlier version of Rusty, and Beyond Zero Emissions was born, and a couple of other projects were born, and of those two, Rusty's still going, Beyond Zero Emissions still going, and two have failed. But one of the ones that failed was a thing called Vote Climate, and the idea was we had to shift the political spectrum to adopt a climate emergency position. So when me and Matthew started campaigning on climate change in 2003, and both me and Matthew thought it was the strategic, and realised it was zero emissions with drawdown at that time. Like, it was just so clear that just the risk assessment, if you applied a meaningful risk assessment, and Philip did some really wonderful early work on risk assessments, if you applied it to climate change, it is just negative emissions. Like, that's what you need. If you value human life or animal life or ecosystem or anything. So we got to this point where we're trying to shift the political spectrum, and the bottom line is we failed. And this project, Save the Planet, is around taking a direct response to getting what we call the Safe Climate Restoration, Climate Emergency Agenda into the political sphere. And yeah, that's why we started it.
So, I mean, it's pretty hard to imagine when you're considering where we are at the moment with our activism, political community, that you can actually get out there and advocate for the kind of level of action that you're talking about. It's not every day that we're used to going out and doing that. How have you done that so far? And how are people responding? How is the community responding to this notion of putting in an emergency response?
Look, I think there's some really good work. Well, take one step back. So when me and Matthew started Beyond Zero Emissions in our project before then, the very first thing we did is we talked about how serious climate change was, and we listed an entire suite of solutions that effectively a climate emergency response. And if you communicate the climate situation without having a correspondingly incredibly serious package of economically changing systems for the country and the globe, what happens is you create a cognitive dissonance in people's heads. So people know that if we're facing 150 years of global warming from the Industrial Revolution, and the solution to that is going and changing light globes, they know in their head that that is not the answer. They know in their head that given the impacts that we're already seeing right now and the future predictions, that stabilising at 2 degrees is not the answer, even if it's not really at the forefront of their mind. So what you've got to do, and a guy called Daniel Voronoff did some great work on this, and you can see it on YouTube if you look it up. If you have to match the seriousness of the message with solutions, and that comes straight out of health communication. So if you have someone with incredibly serious cancer where they might only have a small chance of survival, you have to say to them, this is what you're facing honestly, and these are all the things we're going to do for you, and this gives you your best chance. If you lie about the seriousness or come up with and recommend bed rest, then the person will switch off and disengage. So I actually find it easier to campaign on this, and I think it's not a problem because the vast majority of people's levels of detailed information on the subject is so low, it doesn't really, it just matches that, you just tell them what they need to know. And just so people feel a little bit positive about the whole possibilities that we face. I mean, if you think about how much emissions we could stop tomorrow, literally tomorrow, and I'd say we could easily hit 50% tomorrow. So we could turn off half our lights, we could come to half as many climate conferences, we could drink half as much coffee, most of us overeat, we can switch our meals from cows and beef to vegetarianism or chicken. We could get 50% tomorrow. Okay, that's our starting point, minimum 50% tomorrow, and then we move on from there. So it's about, if we frame the problem as it is and match it with the solutions what we need to, it actually makes sense and it's easy to communicate. Where it gets confusing is when I'm up on a platform and say we need to do an emergency solution at full speed in 10 years, and then another environment group or another party goes and says, well, actually a 5% target by 2025 is okay, or a 25% target by 2025 is okay, or whatever. So it's those mismatching communications around those lesser goals that create the sort of another level of cognitive dissonance in the actual debate.
Okay, well, let's get down to some of the detail. What is your party stand for? Give us some details so we can see in a practical sense. When you're out there campaigning, or you've set up this political party, talking about an emergency response, what does that mean in terms of the policy position?
I just check in with the audience. Do people know what emergency response is? Is anyone still a little confused at all? So, a couple of people. So it's a cross-economy rapid transition from emitting things such as changing our energy system from a fossil fuel-based energy system to 100% renewable systems. And that was the first report that was produced by Beyond Zero Emissions. So Beyond Zero Emissions outlined how you do this in 10 years, how you cost it, and what it means to the country. So, and we learned something from Philip's work when Philip and David came out and produced Climate Code Red, was that despite it looking quite obvious to me, Matthew and others, what we needed to do, until people need symbols, they need pieces of paper, they need books, they need plans. And the response to Climate Code Red after we'd been campaigning for a few years and suddenly they had their PDF and then later the book, people just picked up and ran with it. And so the Beyond Zero Emissions plan was to come up with these solution packages that people could hold on. And so it's interesting to note, like that solution package is going to many ministers in the Labor government. It was on their wall, So it was and Liberals as well. So it's part of having those solutions, but it's not just that, and then it goes on from, so you electrify the transport system. So you're talking about massive walking, cycling, rollout, friendly, pedestrian-friendly communities, and you add on light rail and medium fast rail and super fast rail, and we're talking about modifying our agricultural system. So it's using our fertilisers properly, moving away from beef and lamb and rice in the first case, and then using, if you're going to eat beef and rice, use short rest, long rotation cropping, etc., massive amount of revegetation, stopping logging our systems, etc. So it's all up on our website. And I think that level of detail is probably not the really important bit. What the important bit is why we're doing things as a political reality. And because ultimately it will be a political solution. All right? So we've got a choice. Are we going to wait another election cycle before we have people talking strongly with the climate emergency focus? Are we going to wait 2 election cycles? We're going to wait 3. So the point is that at a real meta level, power is sort of focused in 2 levels. It's around money, and we heard Simon talking earlier today about the really positive campaigns around divestment. And do people all get divestment? Yeah. Take the money away from the bad guys, give it to the good guys, and it happens. Well, politics is no different. It's a context, but what's the power that we control in politics? Votes. Okay, votes. Now, the environment movement paralysed itself throughout the 80s and 90s, since the Franklin movement, pretty much up to the mid-90s, by doing one thing. They gave their votes in a pattern, and the pattern went Labor, Liberal, and then eventually Greens, Labor, Liberal. What do you do if you give your votes the same way every time? Do you have power? You have disempowered yourself. So if we want to save the planet, we actually have to get into a different mode of political activism, which is about moving votes around. And so Save the Planet has a bit of a tactic for doing that, but we'll talk about that.
I just want to put pressure on this point though, Adrian, because I think there'll be some people in the room that would be thinking many of the things that you've mentioned already, the Greens would advocate for. And this also goes back to some of the things you were saying as well, Philip. So can you articulate even more clearly, like in terms of your party, Adrian, what is the difference between the Greens and some of the other policies from some of the other, maybe mine, like Socialist Alliance, for example, that you're advocating for with this emergency?
Okay, so Socialist Alliance is the only other party that has a climate emergency, state climate response. The Greens don't. So the Greens have a policy of zero or negative emissions. All right. So that's flatlining the two or down. They don't know yet. They haven't decided. So the other issue is, if you look at, just take a glance today at the Greens website and look at what issues are flashing up. Okay. So we are literally facing the destruction of the planet and humanity and the species on this planet. And look at what issues are coming up on every Greens, elected Greens page, and what are they prioritising to campaign on. And the bottom line is now, for people who understand climate change, we need to prioritise on one thing, and that is the emergency transition to a safe climate. All right? So that's one of the key differences. The difference, so we run on that, we don't talk about other things. If I was elected to a lower house seat and had the balance of power, I would refuse my vote to a government until they were running a climate emergency policy, and I would send, if I had to, I'd send the electorate back to an election again and again and again if we had the balance of power until they adopted a climate emergency policy. It's just that simple. Like, we have run out of time, right? Like, it's literally run out of time. So we need to find a way of creating a political momentum around this. And if you talk to people in certain parties like the Greens, they will lead to a certain point, but they won't go beyond, very much beyond the positions of ACF or WWF or the mainstream environment movement. So we've got two roles. You know, you can either work at a political level with a group like Save the Planet, or come up with your own version. Like, what we really would love would be, does anyone consider themselves right-wing? Don't be, if you are the most valuable person in this room, right? Seriously, like you are. And, you know, what we really need is a right-wing party to run on climate change, to give the right-wing voters an option. So when people vote for us, our votes go to Family First, Australian Christians, the Liberals, you know, blah, 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 blah. They fly around because there's people across the political spectrum who understand what climate change is. So, you know, yeah.
Just to start and wrap up so we can get on to some questions from the audience. But the other big question really for you, Adrian, which I know you have a response to, but people really want to know, aren't you going to damage the Greens by running?
Well, ultimately, no, because it depends what you mean by damage. So, what we want to do is we want the Greens to move. And if the Greens adopted the full climate emergency suite, it would be fantastic, because we could have a different campaign. We could have a campaign, the campaign could easily be to get the Greens in government, to actually take control, form government, and run the climate emergency implementation. Okay, that could be the campaign. But at the moment, we don't have that reality. So, but the thing is, we preference, we have preferential voting in Australia, so someone who votes for us first, ultimately our vote goes somewhere. And our vote goes to the Greens ahead of Labor and Liberals, and they're the people that they're competing against. So, you know, when Simon said earlier we've got a problem in the electoral system where more and more people voting for minor parties, that's actually not a problem. That is the best thing that's happening, because what we've had is years and years of people wedded onto major parties who can't shift because of an identity relationship with a major party. And because they don't shift, the major parties don't shift. It's really that simple. If the votes don't shift, they'll just hold them in patterns.
Well, so whoever takes over, with a two-party system locked in on identity, whoever takes over one of the major parties then controls half the vote.
So we don't damage the Greens. In actual effect, minor parties who preference the Greens ahead of Labor and Liberal will actually help the Greens get elected, because we'll take votes away from the Liberals, we'll take votes away from Labor, we'll take some votes away from Family First and One Nation and whoever else is out there. And if people follow our how to vote cards, which some do, those votes will head to the Greens before they head back to those other parties that they would have voted for. So there's actually no threat. But, you know, we need to challenge all existing parties, Labor, Liberal, Greens, you know, Sex Party, Australian Christians, everyone to come on to a climate emergency position. And I'd argue, as a movement, we've got three key roles. We need to create the space where we're leading and the movement's running the climate emergency position, and the political parties can shift in there. Create the political space and for people to, such as Save the Planet, to lead. And if people are already involved in political parties, to actually work internally, whether it's Labor, Liberal or the Greens, to ensure that they're running climate emergency policy. Fairly simple.
Thanks, Adrian. We're going to throw it over to some questions now. Just before we do, Carol, we're going to just, if I can call on you for a moment, because Carol's been doing some interesting work on the community level of actually getting out on the streets and starting to use some of the resources that we could probably start to call climate emergency campaign resources. I'll go that far, Carol, to say that. And if you can tell me a bit more about tell us a bit more about what you've been doing and how.
I'm a member of the Victorian Climate Action Network, which is a network of climate groups in Melbourne and Victoria. And we don't have any limitations on who can join the network, but a subgroup of groups that belong to the Victorian Climate Action Network are very much campaigning on accepting that we need to campaign on the emergency, and it's really consistent with what we've been hearing today. And we've used this postcard which I sent around, which was from the Breakthrough Conference, which was held in Melbourne last year. We've used this year. We've used this postcard to hold street stalls, and we've talked to people in the street about this band of safety, you know, the pink band. And it's actually been really, really effective. In fact, people who are not really solid sceptics, but people holding a sceptical stance, have moved through discussion around this postcard in the street. So I really could recommend you using it in whatever way you can in your work. We've also letterboxed all the people in our electorate in the lead up to the state election, which will be held on the 29th of November. We've already letterboxed, and we've had a response from the community getting it in their letterbox. So what we're also doing as part of VCAN, the Victorian Climate Action Network, is we're working with politicians who are standing in the state election to send them those who are standing in electorates where there are groups advocating emergency action. We're sending them this Myths and Reality that's written by David Spratt, and we're also sending them the Real Budgetary Emergency about the myth of there being a burnable carbon budget. So we're sending them those two documents, and then we're going to be following it up with a questionnaire to the politicians on their response to the material that's in there. Now, while this is just happening on a small basis in the inner Melbourne seats, we're really trialling this process so that we're hoping that it might then be able to be used on a larger basis in the federal election. So if anyone wants to find out more about this, you can go to the Victorian Climate Action Network website, and very soon you'll see the questions that we're asking politicians. They're not quite finalised yet, but they will be up there. We're also building to form what we're calling at the moment a science sign-on. We're trying to get climate scientists to sign on that they support the science that is really consistent with what's in this postcard, and to try and get them to eventually publicly declare that they actually support the implications of this science. And we will be doing that. We're trialling that again just in the state election, but we've already got David Carolli, who's a climate scientist in Victoria, to say he supports the climate science, and we're hoping to gradually build that so that we can hopefully over time have more scientists who will say that they really accept how serious the problem is, and that if the statements in this booklet are actually ones they'd endorse. So that's about enough for the moment.
Thank you very much. Take that one back. Okay. Okay, we're going to take questions. I'm going to take 2 questions at a time so we can get through a few. There's a gentleman up the back who's got 2 hands up, so I'm not sure that's going to be 2 questions, but I'll take you first and then the lady down here in the
Okay. Anyone got a mic? Or can you hear me? Oh, great. Totally support what you guys are doing, particularly Flip. We talked long and hard about this, Chris Anderson. Essentially, what you're asking for, and you're damn right, is what we need is an overarching narrative and vision that can hold a lot of the work that BZE have done at the technical level, which confirms that Australia has got the skills and the resources to do what's necessary to stop burning fossil fuels. However, what we have to do is to find a way to engage industry. I agree with you, we've got to do politics as well, but it's mostly industry. In the year 2000, the European community decided they believed the climate science and they don't have enough fossil fuels to detract from the efforts that they're making. So by 2007, the EU Parliament was ready to announce both a vision and a narrative of how they were going to move to a post-carbon future. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow at 1:20. This is almost the end of the commercial. We would love to explain to you, A, how we're now starting to work with BZE, and Stephen Bargrave will be on the platform with us.
Right.
How we can take what the Europeans are doing and merge that with what the technical skills and organisation we have in Australia. So this is a subject very dear to our hearts.
So come along to your session tomorrow.
Yes, please.
Fantastic. Okay.
It's in room. What each room?
Check your programs for details.
It is. It's 1:20 tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll take 2 questions now. The lady in the black here and the gentleman in the green. Thanks.
Great, thanks. I had a question about political effectiveness. I think most people in the room don't doubt the intent and rationale and motivation for this sort of approach, but to use another health example, for example, if we want people to exercise to reduce their risk of early death, often health professionals now say do something moderate 3 times a week rather than what the data actually says, which is really 2 hours of intense every day and things like that. So they take intermediate soft outcomes because they perceive that no one will actually engage with the more realistic, severe outcome. So I just wanted you to comment on what you think is more effective in terms of taking a strong, severe end target for that sake. And are there examples politically where on environmental issues, either in Australia or internationally, that's actually been more effective than campaigns which are focused on a more intermediate and realistic type of target?
Okay, great. We're just going to take the other question and we'll answer both of those questions. Yes?
So a comment and a question on the messaging around what you're doing. Philip was saying that you need to focus, we need to be able to communicate with Conservatives, get Conservatives on board. And yet Adrian's party is called Save the Planet, which sounds, I don't know, hippie to me.
Sure.
And so I guess that's a comment that please
The messaging.
focus on the messaging and respond to those criticisms, if you like.
Sure. Phil, did you want to respond to the first question?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that we need to stop talking about people as if they're just one category. Like if, the usual kind of thing is you've got a spectrum of people, and some people can cope with problems without solutions being currently available at all, which otherwise we wouldn't be here, sort of, in a sense. Other people need to have solutions packaged up pretty well, etc. So I think that it's just simply, I'll assert this strongly, it is simply true that you cannot achieve a goal that requires especially strong effort. Like you might stumble over certain achievement of some goals by accident, but aside from accident, in the case of what we're doing, the forces stacked against it are so high that we won't achieve our results by accident. And therefore, if we want an even tougher goal, we have to articulate it. There is just simply no other way to get it on the agenda. Now, the next question is, oh yes, but they'll turn a whole bunch of people off. So, the thing is, it turns a bunch of people on, who then, their job is to find a new way to message the various bits and pieces of it, to get to the people who are turned off. No, so in other words, what happens at the moment is we are so frightened of actually kind of, disempowering certain people that we won't actually empower the bunch of people whose job it then is to find the much more nuanced messaging, the softer versions, the slower processes, all the rest of it that's needed to get people on board who are not going to get it straight away with the big ask. But unless our movement is committed to the end state goal we want, then we will never develop the nuanced strategies that are able to reach all the different segments of the community where they are.
Adrian, would you like to answer the question about messaging?
Yeah, and also a bit about stretch goals. So the environment movement classically, like if this is what they want, they'll ask for half of it and get negotiated back to a quarter of that, right? That's the campaigning modus operandi for years and years. So what you actually do, what the industry does, is they ask for twice as what they want and then get negotiated back to more than what they were wanting in the first place, right? So that's the enemy. They win, we lose, right? That's how it works. So we want to take their model and ask for the stretch goal. Now, unfortunately, with climate change, the stretch goal is the goal. It's no stretch. It's the maximum possible chance to give us to avoid a climate catastrophe. And we have to articulate that again and again, which I call the Coke model, which is the reason the Coke is the #1 leading brand is, in the world is because they, one, it tastes right, but two, only joking, they advertised for decades. And in the talk that I give on this sort of issue, there's pictures of Coke with sex, Coke with friendship, Coke with love, Coke with whatever. So it's linking values to Coke. So we have to do the same thing, link values to the climate emergency as such.